Yeah, so as Naomi mentioned, we're celebrating. Well, we're not actually celebrating 3 holy days today, because last Sunday at Hatch End we celebrated Heavenly Parents' Day, and so focuses the sermon and the service was on that. And so today focus much more upon the 64th anniversary of True Parents' Holy Wedding and 65th True Parents' Day. And anybody here older than 65?
Ooh.
Yes, most of us. So I'm 67, so it's just realised that True Parents' Day has been around for almost as long as me. So if you think about, well, who should have been the true parents originally? We talk about true parents, but originally, of course, God is our true parent, our heavenly parent. But of course, as a parent, you're full of love, and so God was full of infinite love, an extraordinary love. But if you have a lot of love, what do you want to do with it? You want to give it, you want to share it. Just like if you win the lottery, I'm sure none of you play it, but anyway, if you happen to win the lottery and you won a lot of money, you get on the phone, you want to share it with your family, with your friends, and give it to others, to try to bring joy into other people's lives. And that's the nature of love. It wants to be given, it wants to be shared. And so that's why God created us as his children. Because God wanted to have an object with which he could share all of his heart, all of his love. And of course, an original desire for God was that Adam and Eve should grow up and become true son and daughter and become the embodiment of God themselves, to become the true parents to the whole of humanity. And one of the good things about the Bible is the Bible starts with Adam and Eve. In the beginning. Well, in the beginning, anyway, it starts with 6 days of creation, and on the last day of creation, of course, is the creation of Adam and Eve. And then everybody else then is descended from Adam and Eve. So even though Jewish history basically starts with Abraham, there's this acknowledgement, actually before Abraham, all human beings, without exception, are descended from a common progenitor, Adam and Eve. So it means even though things went wrong, still we are all related. Still we're all, at the end of the day, we're all brothers and sisters. We're all part of God's family. And I think that's really important, because sometimes people like to think, well, this is our common ancestors, this person here. But the Bible says actually that we all have a common ancestor, which is Adam and Eve, and that means transcending nationality, race, religion, everything else. We're all connected, we're all related. I think that's really important. But anyways, we all know Adam and Eve weren't able to fulfill that position and becoming true parents. And so, well, what happened after that? Well, we know it should have been Jesus and his bride. But even before that, the providence went along and stops and starts with Cain and Abel. Things didn't go well. With Noah's family, things didn't go well. And things really only started to develop with Abraham and Sarah. Now, unfortunately, we often just talk about Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. But actually, the Bible always talks about the women as well. And the Jewish tradition also doesn't just talk about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Sarah, and Rebecca, and Leah, and Rachel. And so they're always put together as parents, as couples. And as I mentioned recently, it's very interesting. So the Bible stories then, they're stories about families. Mostly the focus is upon the family. If you look at stories I mentioned last week on Mount Olympus, the Greek gods, all the focus is upon the gods, or the stories of the Viking stories of the Norse gods. Again, the focus is all upon the gods. Whereas in the Bible, the focus is entirely upon human beings. And not just any old human beings, the focus is entirely upon families. So that's what the stories are about, Abraham and Sarah, and then Isaac and Hagar and all these different characters in the Bible. The focus is very much upon the story, upon families, upon couples, upon parents, upon children, upon siblings. And I think that's really, very, very significant, because it's very much connected to daily life. We're all part of families. Not many of us go around meeting Zeus and throwing thunderbolts or all that sort of thing. That sort of stuff is just like a fantasy, it's like a mythology, but it doesn't connect to our daily life. Whereas all the stories in the Bible, they connect very much to us, because these people were like us. They faced the same sort of challenges that we faced. And the extraordinary thing about these people, Abraham and Sarah and these people, they didn't have role models. They didn't have role models. We have true parents for Jesus. Jesus had Moses. Moses had Abraham. Well, who was Abraham's role model? When Jacob and Esau managed to find some kind of reconciliation, which role model were they following? Was there a psychologist or a counselor who was explaining this is the way in which you go around establishing reconciliation with your brother? There was no one there to teach them and to guide them. So they were really the pioneers, because they had nobody that they were following themselves. They had no role models. They themselves became the role models for the whole of humanity. And that's why we go around retelling and telling their stories over and over again, because they were able to overcome extraordinary challenges that nobody had been able to overcome before. Yeah. Nobody had been able to overcome these kind of challenges within the family that they were able to overcome and create this kind of foundation which spread from those original families through to Judaism, Christianity, and the worldwide foundation. Anyway, so as we know, then there's this whole providence, and of course it was possible for the Messiah to have come at some other time. It wasn't necessary to wait until 2,000 years up until Jesus. Because of the stops and starts and the successes and the failures and the missteps here and there, eventually God's providence in that sense was delayed up until Jesus. And Jesus came. And unfortunately, we know Jesus wasn't able to, we understand, wasn't able to find a bride, wasn't able to marry, wasn't able to have a family. Of course, if you read the Da Vinci Code, it's a different story. So who knows? But and then Jesus, of course, was crucified, and so the providence didn't go forward in the way that he and God hoped and intended. And then Jesus said, before he died, and he said, "When they persecute you in one town, flee to the next. For truly I say to you, you will not have gone through all the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes." So this incredible expectation that the disciples of Jesus had, that Jesus was going to come soon. And in the book of Revelation, Jesus says, "I'm coming soon." But of course, 2,000 years later, people, well, what was going on? But at the time, Jesus himself, he thought, okay, things aren't going to turn out the way they did turn out. And so there's this hope that the Jesus movement within Judaism, which was actually very extensive, he had a lot of Jewish leaders who were supporting him and following him. And there was this hope that the Jewish movement within Judaism, because Christianity wasn't a separate church, it was just like a Jewish sect for a long, long time. And there was this hope and expectation that the followers of Jesus would become the leaders of Judaism. That was the hope and expectation. Then on that basis, then the Messiah could have come, not long afterwards. But then there was a great disaster took place. And that's because of various things that took place. And so the Jewish people, they rebelled against the Roman occupation. And the Romans came in, the temple was destroyed. And then there's another rebellion, the 2nd century, and again, Jewish people living there pretty much exterminated. And so that meant there's no longer any national foundation to receive the Messiah. It's no longer possible for the Messiah to come to Judaism, because there's no national foundation anymore to be able to receive the Messiah. And so then, you can say the providence, then it moved to the Roman Empire. And so as it moved to the Roman Empire, then Christianity, there's a lot of people who were Gentiles, or not Jews, started to become Christians, started to follow Jesus. And Christianity is regarded as Judaism light. So there are a lot of people, a lot of a lot of the Gentiles and non-Jews who were interested in spiritual things, interested in spirituality and morality and creating a good society, they would attend the synagogue because Judaism was the most advanced religion in the ancient world. So they would go along to the synagogue, but they wouldn't become Jews. Why do you think they wouldn't become Jews?
Lineage.
Sorry?
Lineage.
No, not lineage. No, it's possible to convert. What?
They were not circumcised.
Yeah. So to become a Jew, you had to get circumcised. So it's a bit of a, for men, was that a bit of a bit of a challenge? And then if you're running a Jewish household, what do you have to do for the kitchen? You have to have a kosher kitchen, certain kind of food, have two kitchens, one for certain kind of cooking, another for certain kind of cooking. So again, it's not a very attractive lifestyle if you happen to be the woman running the kitchen. And so it's a bit of a barrier. So Christianity then was like Judaism light. Judaism without the snips, and Judaism without the cooking. You could eat anything you wanted. Yeah, even bacon. Wow, that's okay. And so that's why a lot of Gentiles who were, they were called God-fearers, who went to the synagogue, and they started to follow Paul, and they became Christians. And so Christianity developed. But then it started to become very much defined by beliefs. Judaism is very much defined by these rules, the laws and the 300 and something laws in Leviticus. Whereas Christianity started to become much more defined by belief. Are you a Christian? Yes. Well, what does that mean? Well, I believe Jesus is Lord. That's the very simplest statement. I believe Jesus is Lord, as opposed to the emperor being Lord. I believe Jesus is Lord. I trust in Jesus. I believe in Jesus. But then people started to ask, well, what do you believe about Jesus? Well, I believe he was a Messiah. Okay. What else do you believe about Jesus? Well, some people say, well, I believe he was a human being. But then some other people said, well, actually, I believe Jesus was God. And you might wonder, well, how does that people started to believe Jesus was God? Well, the first thing is, he did some amazing things. He did miracles. Well, in those days, quite a lot of people did miracles, but, he did miracles. But then the most amazing miracle was the resurrection. Did anybody ever come back from the dead before or since? So people could see, well, Jesus, he was obviously a human being, because we used to have fish and chips with him around Lake Galilee, and and hummus and whatever bread it is. But at the same time, he resurrected. He came back to life, and we saw him, the resurrected Jesus, for 40 days before he went into heaven. So he wasn't an ordinary human being. Nobody else has ever done that before or since. So he's obviously some kind of something different about him to everybody else. And then they said, well, actually, by believing in Jesus, I can experience incredible grace and the forgiveness of sins. Well, no other person went into the spiritual world is able to do that. All the other founders of religion, Muhammad, Confucius, Buddha, none of the followers or members of those religions said that their founder of their religion is able to bring forgiveness of sins. And the only reason you can say that is because people had that experience. By believing in Jesus, they experienced God's grace, the Holy Spirit, and forgiveness of sin and a rebirth. No other founder of any other religion was able to do that from the spiritual world after they died. So people say, well, Jesus is obviously not an ordinary human being. There's something different about him. And so they started to say, well, what is the difference? Was he God? Was he a human being? Was he both God and a human being? And so then Christians, they started to have huge arguments amongst each other about who is Jesus. And that became very much the focus. Not so much just believing in Jesus, but believing certain things about Jesus. And I've often had this kind of conversation with Christians. What do you believe about Jesus? I said, I believe in Jesus, but I don't think it matters what I believe about Jesus. It's trusting in Jesus, putting one's trust in Jesus, which is what's important, and believing in Jesus. But whether I believe in this or that or the other about Jesus is neither here nor there. You know what I mean?
No.
No. Well, I'm glad you said. I noticed you were frowning there. Okay, that's all right. So, for example, when I was at school teaching the school teacher, the kids, to me they would say, Mr. Haynes or Sir, and I was their teacher. And of course, I'm sure in the corridors they would say other things about me. But that was who I was to them. I was their teacher, and they called me Mr. Haynes. But of course, when I went home after school, my kids wouldn't say, "Oh, welcome back, sir," or "Hello, Mr. Haynes." They called me Daddy. So to them, I was Daddy. To the school children, I was their teacher. And to my wife, she doesn't call me Mr. Haynes or Sir or Daddy. She has other names for me. And that's it. And that's, and each child sees their parents differently and has a different experience with their children. And, the Queen, for example, she was the Queen of England, the late Queen. But at the same time, she was the mother of her children and grandmother of her grandchildren and great-grandmother of her great-grandchildren. And each of them related to her in a very different kind of way. So when the Prime Minister would come every week, he wouldn't talk to her as if he was her son or daughter or granddaughter. It would be a different kind of relationship. And sometimes people think, well, and so the problem comes when people think the way I see this person is the only way to see this person. And then people start arguing. And so people have all kinds of, the great thing about God, I think the best thing about God, is that God is invisible. So everybody can have their own personal experience with God, their own personal relationship with God. And the problem comes when people say, well, the way I see God is the only way to see God. And your way is the wrong way to see God, because this is how I experience God, and that's the only way in which God can be experienced. But of course, everybody experiences God in a different way, because we're all different. In many different ways, we're different, and so our experience with God, of course, is similar, but also different. And the problem comes when people, become rather absolutist about this and say, this is the only way to speak to God, or this is what God is like. And it reminds me very much of this, Buddhist Hindu story of the blind men and the elephant. And there's this king. He puts the elephant and gives these either blind men or and asks them, "What is it?" And one grabs the tail and says it's a rope. Another one the trunk says it's a hose pipe. Another one the leg says it's a tree. Another one the ear and says it's a fan. Another one just walks into the side of it and says it's a wall. And they all argue. Each of them has had their own personal experience, and each of them thinks how can it possibly be a rope when it feels like a fan? How can it possibly be a wall when it squirts water? And so that was the problem. They all claimed that their individual relative perspective was the absolute and only one. Mm-hmm. So what to do in that situation? What to do? How to find out what it really is?
Open their eyes.
No.
Put it together.
How do you put it together?
Dialogue.
Dialogue, yeah. So people listen, oh, you experience it like this, and you like this. Let's try and put all these pieces of experience together, and let's see if we can imagine something which can be all of these things at the same time. Mm-hmm. And of course, that's the elephant. So it's like a jigsaw puzzle. Each has a piece of the jigsaw puzzle. And if you think your piece is the only piece and the right piece, but then to try and see it in context and see things from a variety of points of view. So when people often say to me, well, not so much these days, but anyway, what is God's point of view? And I say, well, God's point of view is listening. If you want to know what God's point of view, you have to listen to everybody's point of view and try and put it together. There's no single person has God's point of view. It's like trying to listen to everybody's point of view. And that was, Abraham, for example, he was a prophet of God. And he had a big, he wanted to, anyway, so Sarah wanted Hagar and Ishmael to leave to be sent away into the desert, and Abraham didn't like this because he loved Ishmael naturally. Ishmael was his son, and so he went to talk to God about it. And what did God say to Abraham? Anybody remember?
Yes.
What?
Follow your wife.
Right, listen to your wife.
Follow
And Abraham listened to his wife because his wife could see things. Abraham could see things from his point of view and thought it's not right that I sent Ishmael off into the desert. That's very unfair and unjust. Sarah could see things from a different point of view. And, that was what God said. Listen to your wife and do what she says. And if I followed that rule more often myself, I would be a much happier person. Anyway, so what happened then is Christianity came to define itself by creeds and by common beliefs. And people would argue about what they believed, and they would fight about it. And people would get killed over their disagreements about what each other believed about Jesus. And they all sincerely believed that their way of seeing Jesus was the right way. And so to try and put a stop to all these arguments, and they had councils. And so the Emperor Constantine, for example, he liked Christianity, and so he supported Christianity, but then he found out Christians spend a lot of their time arguing with each other and fighting with each other and disturbing the civil peace. And so he called this Council of Nicaea, and he called all the bishops from throughout the empire, and he said to them, I'm going to knock your heads together. You have to come up with some statement of what you all believe, that everybody believes, and so you can stop arguing with each other. And so that's what's called the Nicene Creed. And, those of you who are brought up as Christians, you may remember I had to learn this off by heart when I was at school and recite it every Sunday. And I said, we believe in one God, Father Almighty, maker of heaven, all things visible and invisible. We believe in one God. Oh, why have I repeated that there? Anyway, my mistake. Anyway, so I remember saying this on every Sunday morning, but at the same time thinking, I say I believe these things, but I'm not quite sure what they mean. And especially when I got to the next paragraph, I believe in one Lord Jesus, Christ, the Son of God, begotten of the Father, the only begotten, that is, of the essence of the Father, God of God, light of light, very God of very God, begotten, not made, consubstantial with the Father. And I would say this every Sunday. I had no idea what these words meant. And so that's why I became a bit dissatisfied with the church, because they were expecting me to believe things I couldn't understand, which didn't make any sense to me. And then, of course, at the end of that, part people don't read out, because it's really kind of serious, but there's more to the creed. But those who say there was a time when he was not, and he was not before he was made, and he was made out of nothing, or he is another substance or essence, or the Son of God is created or changeable or alterable, they are condemned by the Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. So that means that if you didn't actually accept and believe all these statements about God and about Jesus and about the Holy Spirit, then the church would condemn you and you'll be excommunicated. And if you're excommunicated, it meant you would no longer be able to go to heaven when you died. Seriously. And a lot of people were terrified because they felt the church has the authority to decide whether I can go to heaven or not when I die. And so out of fear then, a lot of people just believed this and recited this. And then, of course, it became worse. Then Emperor Constantine said that anybody who didn't sign up to this creed, they had to leave the Roman Empire. They were expelled from the empire. And later on in Christian history, people were put to death because they wouldn't accept this. And so you have to think, well, is there a foundation to receive the Messiah here? No. Supposing the Messiah came along and he said, well, actually, I don't believe this. What would happen to him? He'd be persecuted and killed. So there's no longer a foundation to receive the Messiah. So actually, this is one of the biggest mistakes in the whole of history, was the establishment of this Nicene Creed by Emperor Constantine. And then worse than that, in 380, the Emperor Theodosius signed the Edict of Thessalonica, making Nicene Christian the official religion of the state. So Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. That meant if you weren't a Christian, and a Christian that believed in the Nicene Creed, then you were persecuted. All the academies of the Greek philosophers, they were all closed, and heretics had to leave the Roman Empire. So is there a foundation to receive the Messiah here? No. That's the great tragedy. Is there's no foundation to see the Messiah here, because people who didn't believe the right thing were then being persecuted. And then, as a result of that, then the Roman Empire, in many ways you could say, partly as a result of that, the Roman Empire collapsed and Rome was sacked in 410. And as it says in the principle, providence moved to the Germanic tribes, where there's much more of a free spirit. And then, of course, the foundation Messiah was finally established by the able-type Judeo-Christian liberal democracies, Britain and USA. So you had these Germanic tribes. The Huns were moving in from the east. Everybody got shoved along. And then the Germanic tribes got pushed along, and some of them, Saxons and the Dukes and Angles, they got on their boats and they came here. And they established England, the land of the Ingles, or the Angles. And so the tradition that Germanic tribes then developed in this country, and I'm not going to go into all of that, and then of course it went to the United States of America. So if you think about all these things, then Britain then had an Eve nation, became the Eve nation long time ago. And part of its responsibility to give birth to the first Israel, that was in 1948. I helped to establish a Jewish homeland again. The second Israel in 1776, the United States of America, and tried to establish the third Israel, Korea, got rather rebuffed. They were all not easy births. We were talking, some people were talking about the difficulty of giving birth, having babies and cesareans and all sorts of things. I'm telling you, giving birth to Israel was not an easy experience, any more than giving birth to the United States of America was an easy experience. And of course, lots of mistakes were made along the way. But some things, good things were done. And there's many colonies, spread of Christianity, the technology. And so Father himself, looking back on this whole tradition, as True Mother often talks about Christianity and often talks about Britain, in very nice ways, surprisingly so sometimes. And Father also talked about these things. And so Father himself, reflecting, this is in 1984, reflecting about this, he said the True Mother would have come out of the Christian realm. Perhaps she could have been a British woman. It could be, why not? Once the worldwide foundation had been accomplished, I would have picked the True Mother on the world level. Imagine if the Royal Princess of England had become the True Mother. I'm only interested in one thing, how to restore the world. But, he said, it's because our movements were rejected by the Korean Christianity that our boundaries became so limited. If we had been supported, the Korean movement would have immediately become insignificant because the movement would have become worldwide and universal with no boundaries. Let's say that True Mother had come from Great Britain, the source of the English-speaking culture. The US, in the position of the son of Great Britain, would have been very rapid and easy for America to humble itself to Britain. So that's what he was saying there. So this is very much a kind of, understanding of the sense of the providence. The way things work out is not necessarily the way things are supposed to work out. Mm-hmm. So plan A, of course, was for Adam and Eve. When that didn't happen, then God didn't say, okay, I'm going to kill Adam and Eve and start all over again. God started the process of restoration. And as I said, it finally got started with Abraham and Sarah, and Isaac and Rebekah, and Jacob and Leah and Rachel, and the providence started to develop. And then, of course, had it developed fully with Jesus and his bride, then of course there would have been no second advent. That's what should have happened. But then again, when we look at European history from the principal point of view, you can see that other times in the past 2,000 years when the Messiah might have been able to come, if the foundation to receive the Messiah had been established. But of course it wasn't. And so it took a long time before finally the foundation to receive the Messiah was established. And what is the foundation to receive the Messiah? It's a world where the Messiah is able to be born, is able to teach, is able to travel freely, and to be able to do all the things which he needed to do to be able to establish Chungaguk, or the Kingdom of Heaven. So what other time in the whole of human history, if you just think about the 20th century, what other century was it possible for a Messiah to be born and to have the freedom to be able to go and do whatever he wanted to do, wherever he wanted to go. Yeah. There was no time. And Father travelled all over the world. You know, spoke even in Moscow. True Mother even spoke in Beijing. You know, the whole world, it was possible. There was a foundation to receive the Messiah on a worldwide level. The Messiah was able to travel and preach and teach and give blessings all over the world. That kind of situation never existed before in the whole of human history. It was amazing. Yeah. And so, yeah, Father said, okay, so plan B didn't work. Then Father talked about a plan C, marrying an English princess. Was that ever a possibility? No. Why not? Because in order for that to be a possibility, then Father himself would have had to come to England at some time during the 1930s or 40s. Yeah? Otherwise, how is he going to meet this person? So obviously Father couldn't come here, so why not? Well, because at that time Korea was occupied by Japan. Okay, well, why was that? Well, so if you turn the clock back, you can see there was a moment in the middle of the 19th century when it was possible that Korea could have connected to the UK, to Britain. In 1866, Russian ship... Anyway, Korea is a very pivotal kind of place. You know, China's interested in Korea, Russia's interested in Korea, Japan was interested in Korea. And so if you're a little country like that in the age of empire, whether you like it or not, you're going to be part of somebody's empire. It's just the way it is. So you just have to make sure you choose which empire you're going to belong to or be part of. Really, that's just the reality in the colonial period. You couldn't say, well, I don't want to belong to anybody's empire. That's not the way it worked in those days. You had to make a good choice. And so at that time, the Russians were sniffing around. They wanted to... Russian Navy appeared off the coast of Korea. At that time, there was some French Catholics working underground, and there were tens of thousands of Korean Catholics at that time. And anyway, the French bishop, and I think there's about 7 French priests, then they sent a message to the Korean court. Look, these Russians have appeared. The Chinese are there, the Japanese are there. You know, why don't you approach France and Britain and see if France and Britain will protect you from these other powers? And then if you try and imagine, okay, if that had happened, then the great thing about France and Britain is they were a long way away. So they were never going to go and colonize it in the way the Japanese or the Russians or the Chinese would do. They would just send in their boats, navy, just to protect the country. And then from Britain and France, then Korea could receive Christianity, education, modernization, you know, with a Christian spirit. Anyway, for various reasons, the Korean court rejected this out of hand, and so that connection was never made. And so some years later, Japan moved in, and you had 40 years of that, which is very different. And so that possibility, if Korea became a British protectorate, then like lots of the leading sons of, and sometimes daughters, of families in the colonies, their sons would come here to study. And Nehru, Gandhi, and loads of people, they came and they went to Harrow or Eton. And it's not hard to imagine if that had been the case, then maybe Father could have come and gone to school here, boarding school, Harrow, Eton, maybe could have gone to Oxford or Cambridge University, as did a lot of these people. And maybe he would have, met in a royal princess, and been such a charming, handsome man. I've no doubt he could have wooed one of these beautiful Christian ladies. But anyway, that was again like a plan C, which Father said, but there was never a possibility of that ever coming about because of the mistakes that were made much earlier. So the providence gets delayed and prolonged and prolonged and prolonged. And that's just the unfortunate reality. So the way, as Father said, the way things are is not the way things should have been. It's just the way, this is how it is. But it shouldn't have been like this. We should have been in a very different space in so many different ways. And then, so that wasn't a possibility. Then Father married Songil Choi in 1944. Again, if the situation in Korea had worked out differently, there wouldn't have been the communists taking over the north. There wouldn't have been a Korean War, and maybe that marriage to this Korean Christian lady, maybe that would have worked. And then, again, things would have been different. But then that didn't work because of all the circumstances and situations. So then Father had the second wife, Myung-hee Kim, who used to live in Lancaster Gate, curiously enough. And then finally, the blessing in 1960, which we're celebrating today, when True Father met and got married to Hak Ja-han. And the great thing is that she was successful and victorious in the way that none of the others were. And that is the great victory. Where there's so many, and one of the things that most amazing me about Father is that so many times things have gone wrong in his life, but he never gave up. This for me is just the most thing, even if he made mistakes or did this, or it didn't turn out the way he expected or hoped, he just picked himself up and started all over again. That's the thing I find the most amazing about him. He just started, okay, this hasn't worked. Let's try it again and again and again until eventually it's going to work out. And so that's the great thing about True Mother, is that she was the one who, unlike anybody else, who was great and was successful and became True Mother, and then had many children. And of course, for her, it's not been an easy life, as she has said, as we know. It's an incredibly difficult life she's led. But she's always been successful and victorious, and is continuing to be after Father passed into the spiritual world. I can imagine, from her own testimony, when Father died, she was bereft. What's she going to do? Father had always, I'm sure that Father listened to Mother a lot, but he'd always been the one there giving the speeches on the front line, etc., and now it fell to her. And to be honest, I didn't think she'd be able to do it, to be honest. But then she has, and it's amazing, even though all the things happen, she has taken on this task, this responsibility, and has been extraordinary, the things that she's done. And, establishing True Parents' Day and then all the other holy days that came along after that, Heavenly Parents' Day, which we celebrated last Sunday. And so that's, I think, is the greatness of our true parents, is that despite the fact that things have gone so badly wrong so many times, and been let down so many times by people, so many expectations which weren't fulfilled, they just never gave up. They never gave up. And so, in that sense, it's like a sort of task, And the other thing I like, many things I love about true parents, but, as being brought up as a Christian, I came to the conclusion Father's Messiah, so as a Christian, yes, I'm going to follow the Messiah. But then one of the most amazing things was that Father then decentralized messiahships. He said, you're all tribal messiahs. Oh, okay, that's interesting. I never thought of that before. We always thought, well, someone's born to be the Messiah. But actually, it's not something you're born to be. It's a task which we're all given. Yeah, we have a task to be the Messiah. True parents want us to be not to be in a state of dependency upon him and upon them, but he sent us out into home church. He said, I want you to become true parents. Now, I'm true parents on a cosmic level, and I'm not expecting you to do that, but if you can do it on this level, then you can experience all the things that I've experienced. And so then you can really understand my heart, and then you can really become true parents yourselves. And so then, it's tribe Messiah, and of course there's a national Messiah, Providence, Father appointed people to be that. And of course there's a sense of consciousness, I'm the Messiah. And of course, in this country you have a Messiah. You're looking very doubtful there, Tanya. Well, that's because you come from America. Okay, so the word Messiah means anointed. That's what it means, anointed. So who was anointed recently to be the Messiah for this country? King Charles. And before that, Queen Elizabeth. You know, part of the coronation service is anointing with holy oil. So that means you're set apart and you have that sense, I am responsible for this nation. Whether I like it or not, I'm responsible. And have to have this kind of consciousness, which you can see the Queen had to an extraordinary degree, a sense of, I am the Queen of this country, which means I have to take an interest in every single thing that's going on, and I have to acknowledge people, etc., etc., and to respond to people. These are all my people. And did any of you see that letter which Patricia Earle received recently? So Patricia Earle wrote to King Charles, you know, about the work she'd been doing, and she got a letter back from King Charles. And that's just the way it works. You write a letter to the King or to the Queen or your MP, and you will get a letter back. And that's really important, this kind of, you know, responsiveness and this kind of interest. And so, yeah, I think we're very lucky to have our true parents, and very blessed to be able to celebrate this day together with them. And but of course, you know, the calling is to become true parents ourselves, and with our own family, and then our relatives. And this is the work that Sally Ann has been doing, which has awed me in terms of, you know, tribal messiahship, not just in Africa, but very much amongst hers and Gordon's relatives and family. And I think that's a real role model, real example of the sort of things we can do. Okay, so I'm going to stop there, because I'm sure you prefer me to. And thank you so much for everyone, for Ron, for putting all this on with Inga. And what are you doing? Oh, you're unplugging me.
You've had your spot.
I had my spot. Okay, so let's just join me in a moment of prayer, and then we'll spend a few moments reflection.